Yeah, so my name is John Sedgwick, and and this is my colleague Vlasios Voudouris. We founded the Centre for International Business and Sustainability, CIBS, in 2008 at our university to give us a voice, really, about the rapidly changing long-term business environment. Our view is that we are at a period of accelerated change in which Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction is apt. We're particularly pleased with two projects that we've developed and are now in the process of publishing. One is linking growing income inequality with the global financial crisis of 2007 and 8. And the second is using agent-based modelling to develop scenarios concerning the long-term depletion of natural resources. And it's on this second subject that Vlasios will actually present in a moment. 20 years ago, sustainability was not a meaningful concept for business. Now it's the dominant paradigm involving long-term thinking and scenario planning. And I'd just like to leave you with Arthur D. Little's world-famous management consultancy wrote a report a couple of years back, Ensuring Survival, Business Models in Low-Carbon World. They had four conclusions, or they make four assertions. One, the political momentum towards a low-carbon future is unstoppable. Two, that carbon is a real cost of business. Three, that investors increasingly understand the significance of a low-carbon future and behave accordingly. And four, that the time to act is now.
So the idea is profit, planet and people, a new framework to develop new industries that will benefit the UK, but also some of the emerging economies. So what is the problem? One of the problems we face today is that there's a lot of pressure for energy services and also for food. Why? Because we will see a dramatic increase in the GDP of many of the emerging economies. And one of the, this graphic highlights what's going to happen with the UK, but the interesting thing is you see massive increase in China, massive increase in India, and massive increase in Indonesia, and also some of the crammings coming out of the bottom, which is Vietnam. So one of the fastest growing economies over the next 40 years is likely to be Vietnam, India, Nigeria, China, and Indonesia. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on providing energy services and food for these countries. So the second pressure, in addition to the economic growth, is population growth. These show you two maps of what was the population in the 1950s and what's likely to be the population the next 40 years. So the size of the country has been scaled in order to demonstrate in a visual way what is going to happen around the world. So you see the massive expansion in India, but you also see a massive expansion in terms of population in Africa. And somehow we need to provide energy services in Africa and also in Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, and also new energy services. So these two problems now combine together because not only people will become richer, but also we will have a large number of people that we will have to feed with food and energy services. And all of these things is likely to put more pressure on the environment. And we can see there the different gas emissions that's coming from the different activities that we perform. One of the biggest emitters is effectively energy. So if we want to do anything about the CO2 emissions, we need to address the problem of energy. And that's one of the proposals that we are putting forward. So you can see that the first three colors is actually the emissions that is coming out of energy, and one of the bottom ones is that's coming out of agriculture. So it is very important that we take the pressure on energy services very seriously if we really want to address the problem of climate change. Now, I just mentioned the word climate change. The assumption so far is that because we emit more and more CO2 emissions, this is going to lead in the rise in the temperature, the average temperature around the world. Now, as we already know, the last 10 years, there has been a reversal in this trend. So it is not exactly 100% clear if increasing the CO2 emissions results in a problem with the climate change. However, what I will argue is that irrespective of what's going to happen with the climate change, we really need to move into a low carbon economy in order to be able to provide the energy services that is needed. So moving to a low carbon economy, it is not just a question of addressing climate change. It is about providing the necessary services in order to fuel our socioeconomic activities the next 40 years. So what do we have to do is basically we need to have a close interaction between governments and corporations. The job of the government is to provide the policy constraints within which these constraints that the companies they have to operate, and these constraints actually act as a legal constraints for the companies. Companies' goal is to increase the profit, and by doing that, the hope is that they will increase the social welfare, which is the policy objective. And I don't think there is a problem with this cycle, as long as the policy constraints are properly designed. So if we design properly the legal constraints, which is defined by the policy constraints, then we can achieve a cycle where the businesses will address profit, and at the same time they will put back part of that profit into the society. So how we do that? My view is that both business executives, but also policymakers, they need to think as if they are portfolio managers. And what this means is that they will have to select a set of solutions that will address the issue of energy services, and they will have to address at what intensity these different solutions they will have to be put in place. So the example you see there is A, B, and C. In some cases, you need to have a pre-liberalization, which means that the governments will have a key role in providing energy services. In other cases, you need to have a free open market. So it's not a solution, in my view, it's not just about the companies providing all the services, but it might be a mixture of governments and private enterprises that they try to address the problem of energy services and food production. So the classic example is, how we try to do that is we use a framework, particularly in the energy sector, of affordability, security, and sustainability. And whatever policy action is put in place, it has to address one or the other. So in other words, there is a trade-off. Either you will address security, and you will compromise on sustainability, or you will address sustainability and you might have to compromise on affordability. And that's exactly what's happening right now in the UK with the wind industry, where it's becoming simply too expensive. I think that framework is wrong and it needs revision. I think we need to think about people, profit, and planet. And what I mean by that is we need to come up with strategies where it's going to be people, it's good for the people, particularly the local communities. It has to be good for the profit. Otherwise, why businesses and investors will have to invest their money? But at the same time, it has to be good for the planet. One proposal is the one that was put forward by Greg, which addresses these two things without any compromises. There are obviously other solutions as well. If we do a policy that puts too much emphasis on the planet, it is likely to fail, because it will not take into account the needs of the local people. So if you put whatever proposal you put forward, it needs to take into account the benefit that the people, particularly the local communities, will get out of that. Otherwise, the policy is not going to be accepted. So how we do that? One of the proposals we put forward in our center is to design scenarios. So we looked scenarios about what might happen the next 40 years. So we are not interested in what will happen the next year or the next 3 years, but how the world will look like the next 40 years. And this is a work that we have developed over the last 4 years. So we develop global scenarios, where we look at the global trends in terms of food, we can look in terms of energy, and then based on these global trends, we go and we look into what might happen in the United Kingdom, what will happen in Indonesia, what will happen in China. And then, using the scenarios about a specific country, we move into at a more detailed level where we look at the economics of specific projects. But in order to look at the economics of specific projects, you really need to understand the global picture and you need to understand the country-specific picture in order to be able to properly assess the very last layer. And in order to develop the global pictures, we need to look into the population growth, we need to look into the land cover, we need to look at technology, and we need to look into the energy things. In other words, we need to look into the fundamental building blocks. And based on these general trends, we come up with a number of scenarios. In that example, you see 4 different scenarios. Now, none of these scenarios is going to be a reality. The point here is that the reality is going to be a mixture of these scenarios. But if we design today policies that are resilient enough for all of these scenarios, then we are ready for the future. No matter what's going to happen, we will be ready because we have tested the resilience of the strategies today among the 4 scenarios where the combination of this is going to be the reality in the future. This is an example of how we do that with gas. There's a lot of discussion about oil, and we have published some reports that says that the world oil production, the cheap oil, not the expensive oil, is going to peak the next 30 years, maximum. Obviously, there's plenty of oil on the ground, but it's the expensive oil, and we might have problems extracting. So there is a problem not with the resources of oil, with the rate of extraction of oil. Then we looked into natural gas. There's a lot of discussion whether the 21st century is going to be the gas era. And what we noticed in these graphics is that it's actually not going to be the case. Given the current policies, if we continue with the population growth and the demand of the energy services, the next 30 years, we will be unable to fulfill all the demand that is required from natural gas. So although the natural gas is going to peak after 2050, we will not be able to satisfy the full demand unless we do something at the demand side early enough. And I think that's a very different picture from just discussing peak oil or peak gas. You need to look into the direction between supply and demand. The peak might happen later, but the rate of extraction might not be enough to provide us with the energy services that we need. And this is one of the scenarios that will be published shortly. The result is available, and if you are interested, you can email us and we will send you the report. So what do we do? One idea is within this framework to come up with a new industry. It can be with the idea of carbon credits or energy efficiency credits. In other words, we use some of the knowledge that already exists in the finance industry and try to attach values to the idea of saving, of addressing the energy efficiency side, but also the idea of conserving the forest. So Greg talks about building basically restating the trees. But you can also attach an extra value to these trees because each of these trees saves some carbons. Therefore, you can attach a carbon credit and then you can trade that. So there is an extra value that can be used in order to save the trees. And that's exactly some of the proposals that we are currently drafting for the Indonesian government. They can save some of their forest and they can generate more than $1 billion per year by stopping the deforestation. And the only thing they have to do is build a new industry, which is based on some of the concepts of finance that attach a particular value to the forest. And that is good for the local people, it's good for people that they want to invest in this industry, and it's good for the government because generate an extra billion that at the moment they don't make use of that. It's going to be good for the local people because it will provide alternative employment opportunities, and obviously it's good for the planet. We will preserve the forests. 2 minutes, yeah. So this is one of the ideas that we do for Indonesia. We look whether Indonesia can move into a low carbon economy. We think obviously this is doable. The only thing that needs to be done is we need to use the proper policy tools. One of which is the idea of people planning the profit, and as a specific mechanism, we use the scenarios. So we look at the alternative futures of the Indonesian government the next 40 years, and based upon these scenarios, we suggest concrete actions today. And this is some of the results that one of our colleagues produced, which shows based on the baseline scenario, in other words, if Indonesia continues the pathway that they are just set up, how much they can save under 2 alternative scenarios by addressing the supply side of their economy, and at the same time, if they address the demand side of the economy, or both of them. And you can see that there is a massive efficiency gains they can make, both in the commercial, industrial sectors, in both of the scenarios. So I'm going to just finish my presentation by repeating what I just said. I think that we need to look into the people, profit, and planet framework, and we need to make use of a new tool for policy making, which is scenarios over the next 40 or 50 years, and develop new industries based upon these 2 policy tools. Thank you very much.